Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, what we're going to do today is we're going to develop a brief history of imagination. And we're going to see the unfolding of imagination from Adam Harishon up until the moment of this week's Parsha, which is Yaakov's encounter with the Sarah Shel Esav. And we're going to see how imagination developed in a certain way, then underwent shifts and changes, leading us up to this very powerful moment, this encounter in the depth of night, in the essential solitude of the soul, where Yaakov Avinu reveals a new way of dealing with imagination. And it's specifically this gift that Yaakov Avinu gives us, this redemption of imagination, that enables us to kind of move forward into the next stage of Jewish history, which is the development of the Shvatim and Yosef HaTzadik, and the first drama of the brotherly divide, and the prototype of exile, the descent into exile. So my argument is going to be that if we look at the encounter of Yaakov and Sarah Shel Esav, when Yaakov Avinu stays alone in the nighttime and encounters the Sarah Shel Esav, that this encounter is the preparatory stage that enables us to descend down into exile properly, because without imagination, without the capacity of cultivating meaning by way of faith rather than absolute knowledge, which is what imagination is, then a person can't survive in exile. And so this encounter, these pachim ketanim that Yaakov Avinu goes back for, are the secrets of imagination, the chaf hadimyon, pach and chaf. It's the same osios. That in truth, what Yaakov Avinu was going to retrieve was the capacity of redeeming this concept of the chaf hadimyon, this principle of imagination, of as if. And so briefly, leading up to this encounter, which we're going to spend most of our time on, let's look in a very overgeneralized way, obviously, because Shivim Panim LaTorah, and there's 70 faces to each one of those faces as well, ad infinitum. But Adam Arishon, we said already, in the name of Rav Simcha Bunim Pshischa, was referred to as Adam al Shem Adame, imagination. That the most human quality, the thing that makes the most difference within the space of being a creature, is our capacity to imagine, to cultivate faith, to cultivate the artistry of faith, the formation of faith, which is by definition going to be something that's based on biyad hanaviyah medame. Included within faith is also going to be the secret of prophecy, the ability to receive direct encounter from the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, panim el panim, something that is always and will always be caught up within the imagination of the one perceiving it. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, his prophecy was beyond all forms of prophecy, but nevertheless, it was still not the panim b'panim, because in truth, the panim el panim is an impossibility. And so imagination is what enables us to enter into the prophetic quest in the belief that we can have a direct encounter with God. And it's also the birthplace of faith. And that was the goal of Adam Arishon, to live with this quality, of holy imagination. Because on the one hand, as the Maharal tells us, Adam comes from a language of Adama, the ground. And it also comes from a language of Adam el Elyon, of comparing ourselves and mimicking God. And the only bridge that's going to enable us to get from one pole to the other is going to be the secret of what Rav Simcha Bunim says, which is that the Adam is from a lashon of medame, that our imagination is either going to bring us all the way up and enable us to encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu by way of prophecy, or it's going to bring us down to the ground. But the difference between the two of them is going to be dependent on the very, very narrow bridge of imagination, of the Koach HaDimyon. And then the final test of Gan Eden, right before Shabbos, the entire crescendo of what could have been had Adam Arishon waited, was an encounter with imagination. The Nachash, as the Meforshim tell us, is the entrance of the subjective imagination. The imagination that goes in the wrong direction to the degree that a person forgets that they're limited and they come to think that they can create worlds like God. The Chet of the Yitzadas, the encounter with subjective knowledge, is fundamentally tied up with the question of imagination. Am I going to allow my imagination to keep me stuck within the creaturely being, where a creature can come to think of itself as perfect? Because it's like the Nachash, it has what it needs. It doesn't have that capacity of realizing that it's always deficient. Or is imagination going to be redeemed and bring us to the Eitz HaChaim, which realizes the one thing and one thing alone is Kedushasi l'ma'ala mikdushaseichem, that your holiness is always higher than me. And so, as a result of the Nachash and a result of the origination of Chava, which was Chava Rishona, which is the question of imagination in its unbridled form associated with Lilith, that form of unbridled creativity that gives shape to the possibility of the Chet of the Eitz Hadas. This was all kind of the movements and the strength and the potency of the sugya of imagination, and Adam Arishon had the responsibility of fixing it. But we know what happened. The Chet of the Eitz took place, and ultimately, instead of redeeming imagination, imagination became the threat. And we would have fallen into that dangerous territory of, God forbid, thinking of ourselves as God. So we were kicked out of Gan Eden. We were kicked out of Gan Eden, and with that, imagination fell down to the ground. In that place, it's the first origination of chaos. Chaos is when imagination is unhinged. The deepest form of chaos is Esau and Edom, which comes from a language of Madama. But the original form of imagination was the imagination of separation, of being kicked out of Gan Eden, of imagining ourselves as actually separate from God. And that gives shape to the drama of Cain and Hevel. Cain and Hevel are both approaches towards the mind's grasp of this world. Hevel sees the dreamlike nature of imagination, the capacity to transcend this worldliness by way of imagination and contemplation and trying to see the Shekhinah itself, God forbid. And Cain has the negative addictive form of imagination, which is imagined pleasure and sustainability that's going to come from a possessive approach of trying to fix things rather than to float above. Both of them were unhealthy. Both of them were unbridled. Both of them were unrefined. And therefore, both of them didn't pan out to be a successful model. And so again, imagination remains this dreamlike transcendental state that escapes this world or this addictive tendency to take from the world. And then Noach, Mabul, brings about the bilbul of the olam. When a person gets stuck in the medama milsa la milsa and all of the imagined pleasures and the addictive drives and the gezela and the imagination of what it means to be a person in this world, and they fall prey to the mabul. They fall prey to the inundation of all of the different thoughts and the hirhurim and the misassumptions and the misappropriations of reality and the wrong ways of thinking. And there's a flood. And there's a flood and imagination, and the Mabul, it destroys itself. It falls down into a place of chaos. And the Teva and the secret of Noach is Ma'amin ve'eno Ma'amin. He was a tzaddik, he wasn't a tzaddik. He imagined himself a tzaddik. And when he imagined himself a tzaddik, he was a tzaddik. And when he didn't, he wasn't a tzaddik. When he felt attached, then the light was coming in from within. And he was able to behold the word of God. And when he was outside, he was only receiving light from outside. But the Yonah ben Amitai, the secret of the dove that Noach sends off from the Teva, is the sign that I've redeemed this quality of imagination. Imagination now redeems itself by entering into this dove-like quality. The dove-like quality of the Yonah, which is from a language of ona'ah, of trickery, of playfulness. Noach realized that the whole point is that I'm a tzaddik and I'm not a tzaddik. I'm believing and I'm not believing. I'm in between. This is the nature of the waters. This is the nature of nechama, to see oneself as a fluid creature that's able to occupy two different poles of experience at once. And the Yonah gets sent out and it doesn't return. It shows the redemption of this element of imagination, which is the quality of the ability to make believe with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to have emunah with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to feel connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because I choose to feel connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in spite of the fact that it might be counterfeit. That's the Yonasi Tamasi, in spite of the fact that you're b'derech ona'ah, that it's fraudulent and a trickery, and it's not lishma, and it's only imagined. Nevertheless, Tamasi, it's beautiful, it's beloved in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves the madame of the Isha Yisraeli. He loves the imaginings of the neshama in its attempt to climb out. And so after the flood, we see that there's a slight redemption of imagination, but then Noach HaTzadik comes out and he becomes intoxicated and imagination falls back down to the ground. It goes down to its lowest common denominator, which is actualized addictive tendencies, because we believe that this object in front of us is going to bring about redemption. And then slowly but surely, we see the first rectification, the first redemption of imagination is Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu uncovers faith. Faith, as Rav Tzadok HaKohen Me'Lublin says, is the greatest expression of rectified imagination. Rabbi Nachman says the same thing. That biyad hanaviyah medama, that dimyon is what gives us the capacity of understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Adamcha, achancha, v'lo yadasicha. Echad b'chol hademyonos. There's an echad within all of the imaginings, but the imaginings and the contemplations and the wonderings and the questions and the attempts and the conjecture that we have in coming close to God over and over and over again, this is the emuna of imagination. This is the imagination of emuna. This is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu loved Avram Avinu so much, because he had this quality of imaginative faith. It's really with Yitzchak that imagination, after its first rectification in the hands of Avram Avinu, it's with Yitzchak that imagination now has to go through a new process of building a vessel in which it can become something formidable and lasting for a person. Meaning to say, Avram Avinu redeemed imagination. After Noach sent the Yonah out from the Teva, it was a revelation that imagination can be redeemed, that lo lishma can be redeemed, that imagination for the sake of coming close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which we lost when we seemingly were kicked out of Gan Eden, can now be redeemed. And Avram Avinu's emergence of imagination was that sudden burst of faith that comes with imagination, and it created many, many Gerim. But those Gerim, those people who received that potency of Avram Avinu, didn't necessarily continue. We don't know what happened with them. It didn't last. Yitzchak Avinu is the first time that imagination is forced to kind of mend itself in accordance with a vessel in a way in which it's going to be a practical spiritual tool. And this is Yitzchak Avinu's life. Yitzchak Avinu's life was a way of imagining life from within concealment, imagining meaning within a world where things seem constricted or closed off. Yitzchak Avinu, like we've spoken about so often, saw a world. He beheld a world that appeared to be dark. And he understood that the greatest tool and the greatest way in which we can utilize imagination is to draw light into darkness, to imagine that the light is there and to dispel the darkness in that way. Yitzchak Avinu sat upon a depth of wealth that can only be revealed based on the second look, when a person looks deeper than what the surface tells us. Yitzchak Avinu sat steadily and still because he understood that the shift in consciousness is enough to change the circumstances. And that redemption of imagination, that utilization and the ability to see the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu everywhere and to see the punchline of the joke in spite of the fact that the joke is not told yet. For Yitzchak Avinu, the strongest way in which that was going to be revealed was through Esau. Esau was the true recipient of imagination. That's where imagination was supposed to express itself most intensely. Because what is imagination? Imagination is not seichel. Seichel is the Torah. The Torah is not imagined. The Torah is a clarified truth. The Torah is the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, novlos chachma. The drip drop of infinite wisdom that comes down. It's as ontologically real as anything is real. And it's true because it's true, not because we understand it. The Aleph Beis is the Aleph Beis because that's the irreducible engraving that HaKadosh Baruch Hu engraved his existence into reality as. It's not imagined meaning. Seichel is Seichel Eloki. That's the illumination of the mind. That's the sunlight of the mind. That's clarified. That's not imagination. That is what we have emuna in. Emuna is imagination. What we have emuna in is not imagined. That's seichel. And each and every Jew has to struggle to find the seichel shebechol davar, as Rabbi Nachman commands us. Yaakov Avinu was ish tam yoshev ohalim. Yaakov Avinu was meant to be the one who was able to cultivate the truth of the Torah, the truth of the clarified emes of this metzias, which is that ein od milvado, and that memali kalamen and sovev kalamen and mi baladecha ein shum metzias klal and kula kaime lo chashiva, that all of existence is nothing in the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the seichel of Yaakov Avinu. Esau, which is the Esau Sadeh, Esau was meant to be the dimyon. Esau was meant to be the recipient of imagination, which is how do I draw this wisdom into lived experience? How do I allow this knowledge to actualize itself within a body that is up and down and open and closed and in and out and feeling good and feeling bad and all of the chambers of changes and the colors and the shifts and the ups and the downs? That's the sadeh. That's the place of hunting. That's the place of tzayid. That's the place of searching out, of going into the wilderness of the mind, of trying to figure out how meaning can take shape within human experience. That artistry, that strength, that hairy nature of Esau was the vessel most ripe to receive the gift of imagination, which is why Edom comes from a language of Dimyon. And the Malche Edom and the entire source of Tohu and chaos, as Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov makes so fundamentally clear over and over and over again, was the problem of Edom's form of imagination. It was a misappropriation of imagination. It was an imagination that forgot about its imperfection, as we know. And when imagination forgets about its fundamental imperfection, then it conceives of itself as a god. And that's the chaotic forms of imagination. That's where Esau took that imagination to. But originally, the imagination was meant to go to Esau, and the Seichel was meant to go to Yaakov Avinu. Imagination is the vessel. Imagination is a garment of Seichel, as Rabbi Nachman describes. It's the externalized shape that wisdom takes shape in. It's the personal orientation of self in accordance with mind, heart, and spirit, the feelings, the emotions, my conceptions, my micro, my macro systems, all of the influences. That's my imagined selfhood. That's the vessel to Seichel, to the innermost wisdom. And that vessel is untrue in accordance to the truth of Seichel, but it's an untruth that is necessary. It's a handmaiden to truth. It's meant to cultivate and make space for truth, to embellish so that the truth itself can find a place. That would have been the rectification of the Dimyon, when it understands its role in being secondary to the Seichel, because the Seichel is Kedushasi l'mala mikdusha Seichem. But Dimyon, when it's disconnected from the Seichel that's meant to reveal itself within it, becomes thinking that I can create worlds. I'm God, God forbid. And that's the breakdown of the Malche Edom, which is the shattering, the breakdown of imagination. And so Rivka understood this. Rivka, who comes from where? Rivka comes from the place of Lavan. Her brother was Lavan, Besual Haramai. Rivka comes from this place of the misutilization of imagination, which became clear already when the dove left the Teva. This message came out into the world. And Besual Haramai is this falsification of imagination in which one can imagine themselves as perfect, completely perfect, without any need of growth and without any need of engaging with darkness in this world, God forbid. And then Lavan grows up in his father's house, and Lavan also becomes Lavan Ha'arami. Arami is Melashon Ramai, it's Aramaic, it's translatory, it's a trickery. But that gives shape to not only to Rivka, but it gives shape to Leah and Rachel, and Leah and Rachel are the rectification of imagination within the self. Leah is Bina, is the place of imagination in the back of the mind. Rachel is the imagination of the body. It comes from the place of Besual Haramai. It comes from the place of Lavan Haramai. That's where Rivka understands the need to ensure that imagination not get lost. Imagination couldn't go to the hands of Esau. It couldn't go to the hands of Esau, and therefore she needed to push Yaakov to embellish, to lie, to trick, to engage in imagination, to utilize the very tool that he needs to receive from Yitzchak, the blessing of imagination, kitzayid befiv, to gain that capacity to imagine ourselves as being close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no matter what, being close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in exile and the descent, when Yosef HaTzadik descends down into the pit, when darkness descends upon the self and the world, to imagine ourselves as being close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in those places. That's what we needed to draw down from the blessings of Yitzchak. And Baruch Hashem, Yaakov gets the blessings of imagination instead of Esav. And the imagination in Edom goes into the V'yimloch, V'yamas, all of the dead kings of Edom, which is the Malchei, the Olam HaTohu, which is the breakdown of imagination. And our job is to rectify imagination. But in his encounter with Esav, in Lavan Garti, I spent my time by Lavan. I retrieved Leah and Rachel. I retrieved the capacity of Akudim, Nekudim, Berudim to imagine worlds upon worlds upon worlds that are real because they're rooted in the Seichel HaAmiti, that's Niskala through Nevuah, Biyad HaNevi'im Medama, the secret of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, transmitting the messages down through each and every person, especially the Tzadikim Yechidei Hadoros, the Arizal, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, Rabbi Nachman, all of the tzaddikim, Moshe Rabbeinu, that the imagination, as it comes down through the hands of the tzaddikim, is refined and refined and refined till it becomes fundamentally clear what it is. Yaakov Avinu is not taking that Asa form of unbridled imagination that has no capacity of nullifying itself to the Seichel Shebekol Davar, which is the Amitus Elikus, the fact that Kula Kaima Lo Chashiva, that nothing actually exists. And it's the ability to understand that, no, the garment that we have to utilize for that is kula kaima kilo chashiva, as if it doesn't exist, that chaf hadimyon, to imagine ourselves into a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the redemption of imagination. As Rabbi Nachman explains fundamentally, that imagination precedes the light of Seichel on every level. So the work is to ensure that the imagination is a garment to an inner truth, and then that inner truth becomes an imaginative garment to a higher inner truth ad infinitum. Yaakov Avinu was able to cross over the river with this strength of Kedushasi L'malim Kedushasechem, remembering that he in truth is always derivative and secondary and imperfect in relationship to the absolute perfection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That makel, that stick, is what protects him from the dangers of imagination, which is imagining oneself as absolutely perfect. And it's this descent into the darkness of night over that Ma'avor Yabok, which is the secret of Yichud, Bracha, and Kedusha, unity, blessing, and holiness. Blessing is drawing down godliness. Holiness is ascending holiness upwards. The Yichud is the unification, how two of them are the same at once, how the self can be perfect and imperfect at once. And Yaakov descends down into nighttime, V'yavasa Yaakov levado v'yavik ishimo adalos hashachar. And this is where Yaakov Avinu encounters this redemption of imagination. This redemption of imagination, because what's Yaakov Avinu encountering? Yaakov Avinu is encountering the Yetzer Hara, the Sarah Shal Esau, those drives within ourselves, the bodily drives, the emotional drives, the imaginative principles. That at this point, Yaakov Avinu is fighting for the capacity of imagination to, instead of dragging us down into the addictive tendencies of the animalistic desire that just wants to fulfill fantasy, Yaakov Avinu is fighting for this superhuman strength of transforming that all too animalistic human drive to descend down, and instead to refine it so that we float even more, so that we can transform our experiences into faith, so that we can transform every ounce of experience into a place of light and illumination. This is what's happening with Yaakov encountering the Sarah Shel Esau. It's ensuring for generations, for the Dara Shel Shmad, for times of distance and concealment, that we'll be able to imagine ourselves as being close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That we'll be able to imagine ourselves as the generation, as the day, as the hour, as the minute itself that's right before the coming of Mashiach. That this battle is ad alois hashachar, to the very last moment. And what's happening here? Yaakov Avinu is battling to ensure that imagination is going to be utilized to imagine myself connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chazal give us the exact way in which to utilize imagination, to be medam and milsa lemilsa, to learn how to make holy associations that we receive through the strength of the refined imagination and seichel of the tzaddikim, through the das of Moshe Rabbeinu. L'dama milsa lemilsa, lidmois milsa lemilsa, to compare one thing to another, to see separation and imagine unity, to see two and imagine one, to see separation and imagine connection, to see darkness and imagine light. And through that imagination is to draw out the reality of it. The dimoy milsa lemilsa. Chazal teach us that you look at the world and then you abstract and you ascend upwards and you medama it, you imagine something holier and more refined. And then that holy and more refined level is even abstract to a higher level ad infinitum. And the way that Chazal described this is that we take the darkest element of this world, we take the blackness of this world, the nighttime of this world, the concealment of this world, the tcheles of this world, the ukma of the world, the thickened darkness of the world, the depth of the sea, the tahom rabbah. And we look at tcheles and we say that tcheles looks like the yam, and the yam is blue, and the yam in truth reflects a deeper blue, which is the blue of the sky. And once we're thinking about the sky, we can think about kisei hakavod. And the tcheles is doimel yam, and the yam is doimel rakia, and the rakia is doimel kisei hakavod. And then a person is already mitachas kisei hakavod, from whence we come. And in that place, the redemption of imagination is reformed, and we can transform it into light. And so Yaakov Avinu is fighting, and he gets hit. He gets hit where? B'kaf yerecho. Kaf, we said, is the chaf hadimyon, the imaginative principle of comparing one thing to another in spite of the fact that it's not the same, and believing in that deep unity and that deep bond. And the Yerecho is Rosh Tevos Yam Rikia Kisei V'Tcheles, as Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov points out. That this is the pagam, this is where Esau hits us. Esau makes us lack belief in our capacity to redeem our imaginations, not to allow the imagination to schlep us down like the animal, but to shecht the imagination, to shecht it like we shecht an animal by the Beis HaMikdash, to bring it as a korban, to be makriv this world back to Orein Sof. The whole Beis HaMikdash was the center of imagination. The Kohanim are the tikkun to imagination. The Kohanim are the tikkun to the Chalomos. We daven for the Pitron HaChalom in Birchas Kohanim. The Kohanim imagine a world that's so purified that they pretend that death doesn't exist. That's the koyach of the Re'iyah Ha'elyona of the Kohanim of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the rectification of redemption. And that's why when Rashi says that he hit him in the thigh, Ramban brings down two shitos. He hit him in the dorsal shmad, where a person is going to be under pressure in the time of Torah Shebal Peh. We have to imagine connections and imagine configurations that are not necessarily present. And he also wanted to passel him from avodah. He wanted to stop him from believing that he was a kahuna, which is the revelation of the Chaf HaDimyon, of Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha V'Yichuneka, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks up to each and every one of us and seeks out our blessing. Because he loves Nishmas Yisrael so much. He wants us to feel like we're doing something, like the father who places their child on the shoulders. He looks up and he sees his child atop. This is the rectification of imagination, to imagine ourselves closer. And he got hit. And it was hit. The Chaf HaDimyon by Yaakov was hit. In the process, in the battle, in the afar, in the afar that rose up to Shemayim. Afar is the place of imagination, as Rav Avram Slonimer points out so deeply. And this malach, this Yetzer Hara that doesn't want to be redeemed, the Yetzer Hara doesn't want to be transformed to its true form, which is serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for every ounce of myself to be transformed into a place of revelation for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not to let the imagination drag me down, but to allow the imagination to bring me up. Biyad HaNevi'im Medame. And it wasn't time, the Yetzer Hara, Esau, the Medame, it wasn't time to be refined. It didn't want to be fixed yet. And he says, send me away. Alos HaShachar came. Okay, the light of day is here. Go back to your Seichel, Yaakov. Go back to your wisdom. Leave the Dimyon alone. Leave the body alone. Leave the heart alone. But Yaakov Avinu knows, and he says, Vayomer lo ashalech ki im bachartani. Do not say, send me away. Give me a blessing first. This is the secret. We need to transform the imagination, to refine it to a korban. Not to kill the animal of the imagination, but to shecht it, to be mala it. The same way that in the future, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to shecht the Yetzer Hara, and it's going to be revealed that the Yetzer Hara is the imagination. That begins here in this story of Yaakov encountering Saro Shel Esau, revealing the true force of the Yetzer Hara, which is to take the body and to allow all of my personal orientation, all of my concurrent circles that form my personal identity, each and every one of us, from the place that we are. Ba'asher hu sham, in the place that we are, that is our imagined self, and to use that as a levush to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu rather than making us feel more animal. Yaakov Avinu demands that bracha that each and every Friday night the Malach Ra is forced to say Amen to the fact that Shabbos we imagine the world to be perfect, Ki'ilu kol ma'asecha asuya, as if all of our work is done. It's a microdosing of the redemption of imagination. It's the return back to Gan Eden, the Chakal Tapuchin Kadishin. Yazamer B'Shvachin. All Shevach, Rabbi Nachman says, all praise of God is the rectification of imagination because it's all imagined. We don't know anything. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite beyond measure. And Yaakov receives this blessing to ensure that even though he's limping on his Kaf Yerech and he doesn't yet have that capacity of Yam, Doma Rakia, Rakia Doma Kisei HaKavod, that secret of Tchelas. And the Koyach says, V'yomer Elav ma shimcha v'yomer Yaakov. He says, I'm Yaakov. I'm Yaakov, I'm Ishtam, Yoshev Olim. I have Tamimus, I have Seichel, I have Emes. I know exactly what's what. V'yomer lo Yaakov, v'yomer od shimcha, ki im Yisrael, ki sarisa im Elohim v'eman shim tucha. Your name is no longer only Yaakov, but it's also Yisrael. Yisrael, we know, is the rectification of the Gevul, the Yesh, Reish, Lam, and Aleph, the rectification of existence by way of the true source of existence, which is the truest depth of our awareness, Yisrael, Asher B'cha Espire. The redemption of imagination that comes forth through Yisrael, through Torah Shebal Peh, through Medama Milsa L'Milsa, through Chedushay Torah, through Chedushay Amunah, through Hischadshus Tamidus. This is the blessing that in spite of the fact that you'll struggle with imagination and you're going to doubt it and it's going to drag you down, nevertheless, there will come a time in history where each and every person will imagine themselves as the Kohen Gadol B'Kodesh HaKadoshim and will be able to be the levush of the Kiloi Chashive to the Lo Chashive to reveal how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything, and we receive that light through our own formation each and every moment. Vayishal Yaakov Veyomer Hegidena Shimcha. He says to Esau, Sar, he says to the Yetzer Hara, give me your name. Chazal have 7 different names to identify what the Yetzer Hara is, but at the core of all of them, it's Dimyon, as Rabbi Nachman says. It's the misplaced desire for perfection or a perfect feeling or a perfect moment or a perfect certainty that expresses itself throughout each and every type of behavioral addiction. And in that place, in that place, we want to rectify it. We want to name it. We want to domesticate it and say, you're the imagination. The Yetzer Hara is the drive, is the imagination, is what takes me down, and I can force it to bring me up. For Chidushay Torah, for Rischa D'Oraisa, for uncovering more and more light each and every moment. And to know the name of the Yetzer Hara is to know the source, the depth of the Yetzer Hara, not the 7 secondary names that Chazal apply to it. Because each and every person sees it in its own way with their own expectations of perfection. But the truth of the matter, if we could truly understand how to refine the Yetzer Hara, which is understand its core, to utilize it in Avodas Hashem, so then theoretically the gig of the Yetzer Hara would be up, and it wouldn't chase us anymore. And Rabbi Nachman comes along and he says the true name is Dimyon, but it wasn't time yet. Yaakov Avinu didn't get that name. And so the Malach says, don't ask me my name, don't ask yet, don't ask, it's not time to complete the mission, v'yivarechos Hashem. And he gave him that blessing. V'yikrav Yaakov shem hamakom pniel ki ra'isi elokim panim el panim v'tinatzel nafshi. Yaakov Avinu imagines himself panim el panim, even though we know that there's no panim el panim, but really it is panim el panim. And as long as we know that there's no full panim el panim, then b'schus that we're zochet to the true panim el panim, pnikel, the pineal body, the place, that awareness, that imaginative presence of closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that moment. That's what Yaakov Avinu was able to receive there. And he was saved on what level? My nefesh. It helped me get up the next day. That's the rectification of imagination. To say Moda'ani again. And he went back to that place, to Penuel. It was no longer that sense of panim el panim, as the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says, but now he knows that it was a certain thing happened there. I became aware of something there. And he was walking on his yerech, he was limping on his yerech, that yarcho, which is yam, rikia, kisei, v'tchelas. That limp, that soleya, that emergence, that's also Chava, that's the emergence of Chava, the Dimyon, the Kedusha, as it comes from the Tzela of Adam Arishon, the Binyan Hagufa Malchus, is ultimately going to be the Binyan Beis Hashlishi, where each and every person, Mikdash Melech, Ir Melucha, Kumitzi'i Mitocha Afecha, from the rectification of imagination, from the entrance into holy imagination, with the secret of Yaakov Avinu teaching us that we can utilize our imagination to come close to God. We can use our imagination to come close to God in each and every moment, to imagine ourselves closer and closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to redeem the imagination, to uncover more and more Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is the whole secret of Hanukkah, of drawing the light out of the darkness. Lamata me'asar tefachim. Dimyon is dam yavan. Yavan tries to close off the imagination and secure this kind of absolute picture of it. And in truth, the rectification of Hanukkah is the tikkun of realizing what imagination really is, which is imagination in Torah Sheba'al Peh and Emunah and Chedushay Emunah. Be'ezras Hashem, we should be zoichet to the light of Hanukkah, to the light of Kislev, to the light of dreams, to the light of Birchas Kohanim, to take the blessings of Yitzchak, to take the blessings of Medama, to take it from Esau, to rectify the fallen kings of Edom, and to transform that place into Malchei Yisrael. Be'ezras Hashem.